Good morning. I'm pleased to be here with you all. As mentioned, I am Ash. I want to tell you a little bit more about the Friends and Northern Wildscapes, and then I will hopefully give you some good reasons why native plants are something you'll want to consider bringing into your pots, planters, garden spaces, and natural areas. The Friends of the Living Prairie Museum is a volunteer nonprofit board that is the fundraising arm for the Living Prairie Museum, a 36-acre nature preserve and interpretive center within Winnipeg. The Living Prairie Museum grounds are a pristine, untouched prairie landscape where you can see some of the most incredible diversity and beauty that was here before the tallgrass prairie became one of the most endangered ecosystems in the world. The Friends of the Living Prairie Museum raises funds and holds educational community events for the public to raise awareness and appreciation of the tallgrass prairie and its inhabitants, with the focus being on the species that inhabit the grounds. My business, Northern Wildscapes, is a very small nursery where my focus is growing an array of species from wild seed and cuttings collected from within Winnipeg or as close to the Winnipeg area as possible. I mainly grow plants for providing medicine and for growing out in my 2,800 square foot space, but I offer a small selection to the public from my excess stock. I have a particular focus on native ground covers and plants that like it hot and dry, like native cactus, and I'm actively working on multiplying native lady slippers orchids. I'm hoping that by sharing some of this information and giving you an idea of how these plants grow and can fit into your spaces, that you'll choose to find a way to incorporate them into your life where you can. I consider myself kind of a native plant evangelist. Before I begin, I want to define what a native plant is. So without getting too detailed, in general, a native plant is a plant that grows within a particular region or ecosystem and has been a part of that region for extremely long periods of time, growing in harmony with the plant community surrounding it. Plants brought over from North America in the last century from Europe or elsewhere are not considered native. To add to that, there are plants in the southern US that wouldn't be considered native here because they don't grow in Manitoba. And in stricter definitions, plants growing up north on the tundra wouldn't be considered native if grown in Winnipeg, for example. But for our purposes today, the plants I'm referring to here have been part of the local ecosystem before Europeans came to North America. For us in Winnipeg, native plants are plants that grow in the Red River Valley region. So what are some of the reasons that native plants are so important? Why do they matter to us? Why are they important for pollinators? Next slide. So native plants provide food and shelter for a wide array of wildlife. Slide after that one. Many native plants are host plants for the caterpillars of butterflies, such as monarch butterflies, whose caterpillars will only feed on the different species of milkweeds. Other butterflies that have native plants as host plants for their caterpillars include the American painted lady, the black swallowtail, fritillaries, painted ladies, and silvery blue butterflies, although the list is quite a bit longer than that. Bees and other important pollinators will make use of nectar and pollen provided by the flowers. Birds feed upon the seeds produced by grasses and flowers, and will take caterpillars feeding on native plants, which are important for feeding hatchlings. Chickadees raising their hatchlings require 350 to 750 caterpillars per day, or 6,000 to 9,000 total, to feed their brood of hatchlings, depending on the clutch size. These caterpillars all need lots of their host plants to eat, both to grow to full size, to maturity, and to provide food for other wildlife. If you have some chickadees nesting successfully in your space, that's a good sign that you've got some really healthy habitat. So why is any of this important for us? Yes, birds and butterflies are pretty, but what if you're not really that interested in them? Well, pollinators are essential for helping pollinate our crops. 1 in every 4 bites of food that you take is the responsibility of bee pollination. Planting native species helps attract more pollinators to your vegetable gardens, increasing fruit set and proper fruit development. Kiwis, watermelons, macadamia nuts, mangoes, avocados, canola, blueberries, raspberries, apples, cherries, cashews, and peaches. These and many, many other crops depend on pollinators and either won't set fruit at all or will have greatly reduced yields without pollination. Healthy habitats surrounding vegetable gardens attract predator species to feed on smaller pest species, reducing the need to use manual or chemical pest control methods. On a global scale, the decimation of wild pollinator species here and elsewhere can lead to human health concerns from malnutrition and other maladies due to the reduced amount of food available from the lack of sufficient pollination. Native bees are estimated to pollinate 80% of the flowering species around the world. Increasing the diversity of your space with native plants is a benefit for everyone. Next slide. They sequester carbon. So many native plants have long, deep roots that help sequester carbon in the soil. Plants use the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere during photosynthesis to create sugars and carbohydrates. During that process, plants emit oxygen as a byproduct and store that atmospheric carbon in their tissues, including the extensive root systems of many prairie plants. Although trees are one of the best carbon sinks, 1 acre of native prairie wildflowers and grasses can store 1 ton of carbon per year in the roots and soil. Long-established prairie soils can have over 10 tons of roots per acre in the first 2 feet of soil. The cycle of roots growing and dying continues to store carbon in the soil as long as the plants continue to grow and naturally prune themselves below the soil surface, providing both short and long-term carbon sequestration. Restoring this cycle as many areas as possible that were formerly prairie can help sequester 10 to 15% of the emissions that we create in North America. Unfortunately, the beautiful rich soils that this process creates have been ideal for agriculture, leading to the tallgrass prairie being one of the most endangered ecosystems in the world, with less than 1% remaining of its original range. Next slide. They save you money. If you choose your planting site carefully, native plants do not require soil amendments, excessive watering, expensive fertilizers, or chemical treatments. They've grown in our native soils with nothing but rain from the sky, occasional prairie fires, and the leavings of animals for millennia, and require very little to thrive and grow lush. These plants then provide food for many different insects that then in turn provide nourishment for birds and other wildlife, keeping the ecosystem healthy and vibrant, reducing pest pressure and the need for human controls. Are you sick of spending hundreds of dollars a year on annuals like petunias and begonias and other plants that have almost no value to pollinators? Replace them with perennial native plants, many of which are long blooming and will keep your space looking amazing year-round. If you're already growing perennials, planting a native garden isn't that much different than a typical perennial garden and can be more affordable in the long run. The vast majority of native plants are perennials, so they'll return year after year. If you understand the moisture levels and sun exposure of the area you'd like to plant in, and you select plants that appreciate those conditions, native plants are one of the most maintenance-free ways to have a vibrant garden space that's attractive to humans and pollinators alike. One consideration about native plants, as with some other perennials, is that they can be slower to establish. If you're inexperienced with native plants, we have some excellent nurseries here, including my own, that can help provide you with established seedlings and knowledgeable advice that will make the establishment process easier. But if you're starting on a budget, starting from seed is a great way to create a beautiful native garden, although it will cost you in terms of time, both sourcing the seed and making sure your site is well prepared and well weeded. One way to save money on seed is by learning how to identify plants in seed and gathering them yourself. If that's something you're interested in, we offer volunteer seed collection events at the Living Prairie Museum every fall, where our educated staff and volunteers will teach you to identify native plants and seed and how to harvest ethically. We visit various locations around Winnipeg, and you'll put that knowledge to use to help us gather seed to use in restorations around Winnipeg. As a thank you for your labor, you'll be allowed to take home a portion of the seed that you gather. Those local genetics are well adapted and are an excellent way to start a native prairie garden with nothing but time and planting supplies as an investment. You'll also walk away with the knowledge of what to look for yourself, so you can walk around natural spaces in Winnipeg and collect your own seed too. Starting from seed can be rewarding, but challenging. The plants that call the prairies home have adapted to our cold winters by creating complicated compounds in their seeds that prevent them from germinating unless they're exposed to the cold while they're also in moist soil. This seed dormancy is broken by a process called stratification. We're deliberately exposing the seeds to a cold period while they're in moist conditions. This can be accomplished by clearing an outdoor space of all unwanted plants and seeding directly into the soil in fall, or by using a refrigerator to cool the seeds prior to planting in pots or in the soil. Putting the seeds in baggies with paper towel, sand, or vermiculite is popular for this process. I like using heat-sterilized sand to help suppress mold. Because native plants can be slow starting from seed, especially while waiting to break the dormancy, I often start putting my seeds in the fridge in December for the next year's spring planting. There is a saying, first year they sleep, second year they creep, and third year they leap. The plants take time to set their roots down and before showing their true splendor above, so plant accordingly. These tiny seedlings will grow into much larger plants once they're settled in. I often see these plants growing on the natural prairie, surrounded by competition. Some plants are just a short plant with a single bloom and one stem, but when they're settled into a garden space with all the light, water, and soil they could ask for, and with much less competition from those resources beside them, they tend to grow much, much larger with many stems and flowers. Sometimes it can get quite large, so you can choose to prune certain species back, like asters, in spring prior to flower development. This will often result in a shorter, bushier plant with more blooms, but not all species respond to it well. So if you want to try that, you should just give it a Google first and see if the Chelsea chop, which is what it's called, will work for you. Our lawns cost us a lot. When you choose to replace lawn space with native plants, you eliminate the fuel used to cut the grass, the water used to maintain, and the fertilizers used to keep it growing healthy. Fertilizers that contribute to runoff that creates algal blooms and excessive phosphorus issues in Lake Winnipeg. We use so much unnecessary fertilizer, and more than one gardener has found out the hard way that plants don't grow in over-fertilized soils. There's definitely such a thing as too much of a good thing, and native plants don't need all that fertilizer. If you need to have a lawn space, but you'd still like to explore having native plants, there are a number of native ground covers to choose from blue grama grass, violets, wild strawberries, and other fantastic choices that can either be mowed like a traditional lawn space or are short enough to be left to grow, or both, but without all the fertilizers, chemicals, and water. It can be hard to eliminate a lawn completely if you use the space for recreation, but there are definitely alternatives to shallow-rooted non-native grasses that require a lot of maintenance and fertilizer to keep healthy, lush, and free of unwanted weeds. If you have riverbank property, native grasses and wildflowers can also offer excellent soil stabilization properties, reducing land loss to erosion. There are native plant selections to plant over septic fields, too. Choosing to garden with native plants can save you time on maintenance, money, and water. Next slide. So they're perfect for low-maintenance gardening. Once they're established in appropriate areas, native plants are a fantastic landscaping option due to their ability to withstand our harsh seasons. These are plants that have withstood our incredibly bitter winters, our yearly spring flooding, our hot and scorching summers, and everything else the prairies that can throw at us. If you plant them in their appropriate conditions, they don't need help or assistance from you once they're established. If you're tired of deadheading and fertilizing and constant maintenance for plants that just die on you anyway, you can leave all that behind with a native garden. Once the plants have had time to settle in, you don't need to do any of those things to have them perform a beautiful show for you year after year. There are native plants for every garden type: deep, dry shade, open, full sun, wet areas, you name it. Are you struggling with dry shade under a tree? There's native ground covers that spread well in dry shade. Do you have a moist, shady area you'd like to have a ground cover with beautiful blooms to fill the area? We have some beautiful plants in Manitoba that are perfect for that. Do you have a moist, sunny area that's too wet to mow? Fill it with native plants. They're short and tall growing species that love wet feet. If you have a dry, rocky area that nothing seems like it wants to grow in, we've got species that love that. The prairie crocus, our provincial flower, absolutely loves dry, rocky soils and grows in the harshest of conditions. We even have 3 different species of cactus in Manitoba, and they all have beautiful blooms. Many native plants are easy to grow and are well behaved in a garden space. That said, there's definitely some exceptions. I like to call those aggressive natives instead of invasive. Invasive implies it's invading, and since it's a native plant in its natural space, it's not really invading, even if it's unwanted. So aggressive growing native plants can be used to fill troublesome areas. For example, I use Canada anemone to fill a dry, partially shady spot behind my neighbor's garage that otherwise grows a lot of invasive thistle and bellflower. Has gorgeous flowers in the spring, short-growing foliage that looks attractive in the summer, but it also spreads really quickly underground and more from seed. So this makes it ideal for that space, but it's not a great addition to a garden with more timid species in it. Virginia creeper is a vine that grows quickly onto vertical spaces, making an excellent living screen for trellises, and birds adore the berries, but it grows extremely fast and it self-seeds, so it's really difficult to manage in smaller spaces. Thankfully, most native plants don't spread so rapidly, and they play really well in established garden spaces. Next slide. So they are beautiful. Native wildflowers have an incredible array of beautiful blooms. Many of our native plants have been selected by gardeners and bred to create different colors and sizes of blooms. Echinacea, or purple coneflower, is one of these plants. Most people are familiar with it to some extent. These specially bred plants are known as cultivars. The wild forms of many flowers are just as beautiful and are more likely to be beneficial to pollinators, however. Occasionally, our desire for beauty breeds out a trait that the pollinators are appreciating or relying on. So if you are looking for more bees and butterflies specifically, select the wild type plant over the cultivar that's specially bred. You'll know it's a cultivar if it has an extra name in single quotes beside it. So the Cinderella variety of swamp milkweed is an example of that. If you still really enjoy the cultivars, there's no problem to plant them, just make sure that you also put the wild-type plants beside them. Many of our native grasses grow attractive seed heads, and some even make great lawn alternatives, like blue grama grass. That warm season sun-loving grass appreciates dry areas, and it grows no more than 18 inches with the seed heads that look like little eyelashes, and it's closer to like 8 to 12 inches without the seed heads. It can be left unmown entirely, or you can mow it like a traditional lawn year-round, or you can just mow it in the spring and leave it to go to seed in the fall. So the photo on the slide right now is one of our rare plants here in Manitoba, bloodroot. This blooms in early spring, with flowers emerging before the foliage. After the flowers are finished, they have attractive green leaves that grow until the early fall that makes a really nice ground covers for moist areas in part to full shade. So next slide. So the photos on this slide here are an array of different flowers native to Manitoba. On the upper left-hand side, we have wild bergamot. This folds-apart sun plant blooms in early July and is loved by bees and hummingbirds. The leaves can be used as a substitute for oregano or thyme and are very fragrant. It spreads slowly through the roots in the soil. Moving to the right, the red and yellow blossoms of wild columbine are very popular with hummingbirds. This plant is really versatile and tolerates a range of conditions from full sun to full shade, although they don't like wet feet. The hanging blooms appear in May and June, although they can rebloom periodically throughout the year. These plants self-seed, but their seedlings are really easy to pull out if they're not wanted. On the very right-hand side, the purple flower is our native echinacea, the narrow-leaf coneflower. Although it's not commonly found in the Red River Valley, preferring the drier areas in the southwestern portion of the province, it's commonly grown as a native flower in our gardens. As mentioned, these plants like it dry and sunny. On the bottom left, we have the sunny blooms of gaillardia, or blanket flower. This is one of the top flowers visited in my yards. It prefers dry areas, but also does well with a bit more moisture. It can tolerate full sun, but does best, or part sun, but does best in full sun conditions. Blooms in late June or early July and keeps going throughout most of the year. It can be short-lived in less than ideal conditions, but also slowly spreads when it's really in a spot that it appreciates. And the last flower on the bottom is prairie lily. This beautiful lily likes a moderately moist area and full-apart sun. They take a long time to flower from seed and longer still to develop multiple flowering buds, but their beauty is well worth the wait. They're a spectacular addition to the native plant garden. And that brings me to the end, and I hope that you've enjoyed learning about the plants that call our province home and that you're considering bringing some of them into your space.